You know that friend who always cancels plans? The one who's sick again, tired again, maybe next time? Yeah, that friend isn't avoiding you. They're protecting something. And before you write them off as antisocial or boring, there's an entire psychological framework that explains why some people would genuinely rather reorganize their closet than go to a party. Today, we're breaking down the psychology of people who love staying home. And no, they're not broken, they're not lazy, and they're definitely not missing out on life. They're operating on a completely different nervous system frequency than the people who think a quiet Friday night is a personal tragedy. Here's the thing. You're not antisocial, you're not boring, you're not broken. What you are is wired differently. And society has spent your entire life telling you that difference is a problem. That you need to be more outgoing, more spontaneous, more willing to say yes to things that make your soul want to leave your body. But here's what they don't tell you. The reason you feel drained after 2 hours at a crowded bar while your friend is just getting started isn't about personality. It's about biology. It's about how your brain processes stimulation. And it's about time someone explained why your version of a perfect Saturday night makes complete psychological sense. Let's start with the most misunderstood concept in all of psychology. Introversion versus extroversion. And I'm not talking about whether you're shy or chatty. I'm talking about where your brain gets its energy. Extroverts recharge through stimulation. Their dopamine systems light up in response to novelty, social interaction, and external engagement. They need the noise, the people, the activity. Without it, they feel understimulated and restless. That's not a choice. That's neurochemistry. Introverts, on the other hand, recharge through stillness. Their brains are already running at a higher baseline level of internal stimulation. They process information more deeply, their thoughts are more active, and their nervous systems are more sensitive to input. Which means that what feels energizing to an extrovert feels like sensory overload to an introvert. It's not that introverts hate people, it's that people cost them more energy to process. Every conversation, every social cue, every environmental stimulus requires more cognitive resources. And after a few hours of that, their system is tapped out. Psychologists call this optimal arousal theory. Everyone has an ideal level of stimulation where they feel most comfortable and perform best. For extroverts, that level is higher. They need more input to reach their sweet spot. For introverts, that level is lower. They hit their optimal zone with less external stimulation because they've got so much going on internally. It's like volume settings on a stereo. Extroverts need the dial at 8 to feel good. Introverts are perfectly content at 3. Neither is wrong. They're just calibrated differently. And here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just about preference. This is about nervous system wiring. Some people have what researchers call high sensory processing sensitivity. Their nervous systems pick up on subtleties that others miss. The hum of fluorescent lights, the texture of a crowded room, the micro expressions on someone's face. They're processing everything at a deeper level, which means their system reaches capacity faster. It's not weakness, it's sophistication. While everyone else is skating on the surface, these people are diving deep, and deep processing is exhausting. So when someone says they'd rather stay home than go to that loud restaurant downtown, what they're really saying is, my nervous system has done the math, and the cost outweighs the benefit. That's not antisocial. That's intelligent resource management. Now let's talk about control, because here's something people who love going out don't always understand. Home isn't just comfortable. Home is predictable. And for people with sensitive nervous systems or anxiety, predictability is regulation. Out in the world, there are 1,000 variables you can't control. Who's going to be there? How loud it's going to be? Whether you'll be able to leave when you want to? Whether someone's going to ask you a question that requires you to perform emotional labor you don't have bandwidth for? At home, you control the lighting, the noise level, the social demands, the timing. You control everything. And for someone whose system is already working overtime to process stimulation, that control isn't luxury, it's necessity. Psychologists call this a high-contingency environment, an environment where actions and outcomes are directly linked, where you can predict what's going to happen based on what you do. For people who grew up in unpredictable environments, or people whose nervous systems crave structure, home becomes a sanctuary precisely because it's the one place where they get to call the shots. It's not about hiding from the world. It's about creating a space where their nervous system can finally downregulate, where they don't have to be on high alert, where they can just exist without performing. And that performance piece is crucial, because here's what society doesn't talk about. Social interaction, for a lot of people, requires a tremendous amount of performance. You're managing your facial expressions, your tone, your body language. You're reading the room, adjusting to social cues, making sure you're engaging appropriately. For extroverts, a lot of this happens automatically. For introverts and highly sensitive people, it's manual labor. Every smile, every laugh, every nod is a conscious choice. And after a few hours of that, you're not just tired, you're depleted. Staying home means you get to drop the performance. You get to stop managing how you're perceived. You get to stop translating your internal experience into something palatable for public consumption. And that freedom, that permission to just be without editing yourself, is deeply restorative. Now, here's something wild that research has consistently shown. People who enjoy solitude tend to have higher levels of creativity, deeper introspection, and stronger problem-solving abilities. A study by psychologists Long and Averill found that people who are comfortable being alone score higher on creative thinking tasks. Another study, published in the Journal of Creative Behavior, found that solitary activities are often where breakthrough ideas emerge. Because creativity requires space. It requires the ability to follow a thought without interruption, to let your mind wander without the social pressure to stay on track. While everyone else is out being stimulated by external input, people who love staying home are getting stimulated by internal exploration. They're reading, creating, thinking, processing. They're doing the deep work that produces innovation. That's not isolation. That's incubation. Some of the most creative minds in history were people who craved solitude. Writers, inventors, artists, scientists. People who understood that meaningful work happens in quiet spaces, not crowded rooms. But here's where we need to address the elephant in the room. Because there's a difference between healthy solitude and avoidant isolation. And that distinction matters. Healthy solitude is restorative. It's a choice. It leaves you feeling recharged, centered, more like yourself. Avoidant isolation, on the other hand, is driven by fear. It's not that you prefer being alone. It's that being around people triggers anxiety, shame, or pain that feels unbearable. And instead of addressing those feelings, you avoid the situations that trigger them. Social anxiety disorder affects approximately 15 million adults in the United States, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. And for people struggling with social anxiety, staying home isn't a preference, it's a coping mechanism, one that provides short-term relief but long-term constriction. Because when you avoid something out of fear, the fear doesn't shrink, it grows. Your world gets smaller, your confidence erodes. And what started as self-protection becomes self-imprisonment. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. When you choose to stay home, are you moving towards something or away from something? Are you choosing rest and restoration, or are you running from discomfort? Are you honoring your needs, or are you feeding your fears? Because one of those paths leads to well-being. The other leads to stagnation. If you're staying home because you genuinely feel better there, because it aligns with how you're wired, because it gives you energy instead of draining it, that's healthy. That's self-awareness. That's you understanding your nervous system and making choices that support your well-being. But if you're staying home because the thought of going out makes your chest tight, because you're convinced people are judging you, because you feel safer avoiding situations than facing them, that's something different. That's anxiety. And anxiety isn't something you accommodate. It's something you address. The distinction is simple. Healthy solitude expands you. Avoidant isolation contracts you. One makes you feel more like yourself. The other makes you feel like a smaller version of yourself. One is rooted in self-knowledge. The other is rooted in self-doubt. Now let's talk about the cultural bias here. Because society has this obsession with extroversion, with being out, being seen, being social, we romanticize the person who's always at every event, who knows everyone, who's the life of the party. We celebrate busyness, we worship visibility, and we treat quiet, home-based contentment like it's something sad. Like it's something you do when you can't do better. But here's the truth. That bias isn't based on psychology, it's based on culture. Western culture, specifically, valorizes extroversion because it aligns with capitalist values. Networking, self-promotion, constant productivity, public performance. These are the traits that get rewarded in a system built on visibility and transaction. But that doesn't make them superior, it just makes them economically advantageous in a specific cultural context. In other cultures, particularly in East Asia, introversion and introspection are valued differently. Quiet contemplation, deep listening, thoughtful observation. These aren't seen as deficits, they're seen as wisdom. The idea that you need to be constantly social to be fully alive is a culturally specific belief, not a universal truth. And it's worth questioning why we've internalized the idea that the extroverted way of being is the right way of being. Because when you look at the data, introverts and people who prefer solitude aren't less happy. They're not less successful. They're not less fulfilled. They just define happiness, success, and fulfillment differently. They prioritize depth over breadth, quality over quantity, meaning over visibility. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, in a world that's increasingly noisy, distracted, and surface level, the ability to find contentment in stillness might be one of the most valuable skills you can have. Here's what all of this adds up to. People who love staying home aren't broken. They're not missing out. They're not avoiding life. They're living life on terms that actually work for their nervous system, their psychology, and their values. They've figured out that peace isn't found in constant motion. That connection doesn't require constant presence. That a life well lived doesn't have to look like anyone else's definition of full. You're not antisocial. You're anti-noise. You're not boring. You're discerning. You're not hiding from the world. You're creating a world that doesn't cost you your sanity to inhabit. And in a culture that equates worth with visibility, choosing to be unseen, to be quiet, to be still, is actually an act of resistance. It's you saying, I don't need external validation to know I'm living fully. I don't need to perform my life for an audience to know it has value. I'm fine right here, in my own space, on my own terms. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. That's you understanding something that a lot of people spend their whole lives avoiding. That real contentment doesn't come from chasing what everyone else says you should want. It comes from honoring what you actually need. And if what you need is a quiet Friday night, a good book, and absolutely zero obligation to be anywhere or do anything, then that's exactly what you should have. Without apology, without explanation, without feeling like you're somehow doing life wrong. Because you're not doing it wrong, you're doing it differently. And different isn't less than, it's just different. So tell me, are you team staying home or team going out? Drop it in the comments. Let's find our people. And if this resonated, hit subscribe. Because we're diving deep into the psychology of the misunderstood, the overlooked, and the people who've been told their whole lives that the way they're wired is the wrong way. Spoiler alert, it's not. You're not broken. You're built for depth in a world obsessed with noise. And that's exactly what makes you fascinating.